"Sir, please don't hang up. My mom won't wake up and she has blood in her mouth." The trembling voice of a child on the other end of the line made Alexander Hayes feel his blood run cold. He had dialed that number with the firm intention of firing his housekeeper for missing 3 consecutive days without explanation. He had prepared a cold speech about professionalism and responsibility, but instead of hearing the adult voice he expected, a little boy of barely 5 years old answered the phone, sobbing desperately. "I tried to wake her up like you taught me when someone sleeps too long, but she won't open her eyes. Her face is really cold." What Alexander discovered upon arriving at his employee's house left him completely shattered, a reality he never imagined, hidden behind the discreet smile of the woman who cleaned his apartment every day, and a secret that would change his life forever. Alexander Hayes adjusted the knot of his Italian tie while gazing at New York City from the window of his office on the 28th floor of the One Vanderbilt Tower. At 32 years old, he had built a tech empire based on financial apps that revolutionized the American market. His success was undeniable, and his reputation as a ruthless entrepreneur preceded him in every business meeting. The aroma of specialty coffee imported from Colombia mingled with the scent of leather from the custom-designed armchairs in his office. Everything in that space reflected absolute control, maximum efficiency, and zero tolerance for failure. His fingers drummed impatiently on the walnut desk as he reviewed the weekly HR report. A name highlighted in red caught his attention and sparked his immediate irritation. Catherine Reed, housekeeper. 3 consecutive absences without justification or notice. Alexander clenched his jaw in evident frustration. He had hired Catherine 4 years ago precisely for her impeccable punctuality and absolute discretion. The woman arrived every morning at 6, sharp, did her work without making a sound, and left before he returned from the office. She was perfect, precisely because she was invisible. She never asked for favors, never complained, never invaded his personal space with unnecessary conversations about her private life. But now, after 3 days without showing up and without even sending a text message to notify, Catherine had crossed the invisible line separating reliability from irresponsibility. Alexander couldn't allow any employee, no matter how long-serving, to think the rules didn't apply to them. Discipline was the fundamental pillar of his business empire, and that philosophy extended to all aspects of his life, including domestic staff. He picked up his latest model smartphone and searched for Catherine's number in his contacts. As the phone rang, Alexander mentally rehearsed the exact words he would use. They would be direct, professional, and final, with no room for emotional pleas or sentimental excuses. Catherine had shown a lack of commitment, and the consequences would be immediate. He had already instructed his personal assistant to start looking for a replacement, preferably someone younger, with impeccable references from important families in the Upper East Side or Greenwich Village. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. Alexander expected to hear Catherine's voice, probably full of apologies and explanations that he would cut off with glacial elegance. But on the 4th ring, someone answered with a broken breath. "Sir, are you the sir who gives my mummy work?" The voice was high-pitched, childish, loaded with an urgency that hit Alexander like an unexpected punch to the stomach. He frowned in confusion, checking his phone screen to confirm he had dialed the right number. Indeed, it was the contact saved as Catherine Reed. "Kid, I need to speak with Catherine. Is your mum there?" he asked, trying to keep his tone professional despite the strange situation. "Sir, please don't hang up." The little voice trembled on the other end of the line, and Alexander could clearly hear that the child was crying. "My mum won't wake up and she has blood in her mouth. I tried to clean her like she cleans me when I get hurt, but it keeps coming out." Alexander's world stopped abruptly. His entrepreneurial brain, always calculating and analytical, took several seconds to process the magnitude of what he had just heard. The irritation over the unjustified absences evaporated instantly, replaced by something much more primitive and human that he hadn't felt in years. Genuine fear for another person. "Wait, what's your name?" Alexander asked, standing instinctively from his executive chair. "My name is Henry. I'm 5 years old, sir. I'm turning 6 inches December." The response came between contained sobs, and Alexander could mentally visualize a small child trying to be brave in a terrifying situation. "Henry, listen to me very carefully. Is your mom breathing?" Alexander was already grabbing the keys to his Tesla from the desk, the phone pressed to his ear as he hurried out of the office. "I think so. but she makes a weird noise, like when my grandma coughed a lot before she went to heaven." Henry paused and then added in a lower voice, "Sir, I'm really scared. I don't know what to do, and I can't call my daddy because he left a long time ago." Alexander felt something break inside his chest, something he had kept carefully shielded for years. As he ran to the elevator, he pressed the button urgently and asked Henry for his address. The child recited the information with a trembling voice, but surprisingly clear, showing that Catherine had taught him to memorize important details for emergencies. Harlem, 125th Street, number 247, apartment 3, above the bodega. Henry added the last detail, and Alexander immediately recognized the area. It was a working-class neighborhood in Upper Manhattan, where some of his lower-level employees lived in conditions he could barely imagine. "Henry, you're a very brave kid. Now I'm going to call an ambulance, and then I'm coming there personally. Can you open the door when they arrive?" Alexander was already in the parking garage, starting his car's engine with hands that trembled slightly. "Yes, sir. Mom taught me how to open all the locks in case something bad happened one day." The response revealed a preventive preparation that tore at Alexander's soul. What kind of life did Catherine lead to have trained her young son to handle emergencies? Alone, Alexander drove down Fifth Avenue with an urgency he had never experienced in his carefully planned life. His silver Tesla zigzagged through New York's evening traffic, while he spoke simultaneously with 911 and Henry through the hands-free system. The child's voice had become his emotional compass, guiding him through completely unfamiliar territory. Genuine fear for other people's well-being. "Sir, my mum made that noise again, the one that sounds like bubbles." Henry tried to describe what he heard with the limited vocabulary of a 5-year-old. "It's okay, Henry. The ambulance is on its way. You just stay close to your mum, but don't move her, okay?" Alexander forced calm into his voice, though his heart was pounding uncontrollably. The drive from one Vanderbilt to Harlem took 35 minutes that felt like eternal hours. When he finally arrived on 125th Street, Alexander parked his Tesla in a no-parking zone, ignoring the curious stares from neighbors who eyed the luxury car completely out of place in that humble neighborhood. The building was an old 3-story structure with a deteriorated facade and balconies full of hanging laundry. The bodega on the ground floor emanated the characteristic aroma of fresh coffee and sandwiches. He climbed the worn concrete stairs 2 at a time, following the directions Henry had given him. Apartment 3 was at the end of a narrow, dark hallway. Before he could knock, the door opened, revealing a small child with jet-black hair, huge brown eyes full of tears, and a Yankees t-shirt several sizes too big. His bare feet contrasted with the cold tile floor. "Are you Mr. Alexander?" Henry asked with a broken voice, wiping his nose with the back of his hand. "Yes, that's me, champ. Where's your mum?" Alexander instinctively crouched down to be at the child's level, a gesture he had never made with any other kid, including the children of his business partners. Henry led him through a tiny apartment that consisted of a single room functioning as living room, dining area, and bedroom. The furniture was sparse but impeccably clean. A floral curtain separated a small area that served as the kitchen. On a mattress placed directly on the floor, Alexander saw Catherine unconscious. He vaguely recognized the woman he had seen hundreds of times in his apartment, always discreet, always working in silence, always invisible. But now, seeing her lying on that thin mattress with a patched sheet, with dried blood at the corner of her lips and skin pale as paper, Alexander felt an inexplicable shame for never having truly seen her as a human being. He approached quickly and checked her pulse at the neck. It was weak but present. Her breathing was irregular and made a worrying, wheezing sound. "How long has she been like this?" Alexander asked while checking the basic vital signs he vaguely remembered from a first aid course years ago. "Since last night, sir. I woke up because I heard her coughing really bad, and when I came to see her, she was lying like this." Henry hugged himself, shivering despite the warmth in the apartment. "I put her favorite blanket on her and left water right here beside her, but she didn't drink it." The sound of sirens approaching filled the air, and Alexander felt immense relief. The paramedics arrived quickly, efficient and professional despite the precarious conditions of the place. They assessed Catherine swiftly, and their serious expressions confirmed the gravity of the situation. "We need to transport her to the hospital immediately. Vital signs are highly compromised. Dangerously low blood pressure, severe dehydration, and possible internal bleeding." The lead paramedic looked at Alexander. "Are you family of the patient?" "I'm her employer," Alexander replied, and the words sounded strangely inadequate on his lips. "And the child?" Henry had clung to Alexander's leg with the desperation of someone who had no one else in the world. His small fingers dug into the fabric of the designer pants as if it were his only lifeline in the midst of a terrifying storm. "Do you have other family who can take care of him?" the paramedic asked as they prepared Catherine for transport. Alexander looked around the tiny apartment for clues. There were no family photos on the walls, no indication of grandparents, uncles, or cousins, just a childish drawing taped up showing two figures holding hands with a smiling sun above. "Mummy and me," the legend read in clumsy handwriting. "Sir, you're going to stay with me." Henry lifted his huge eyes toward Alexander, and in that gaze was an absolute trust that shattered all the emotional defenses the entrepreneur had built over decades. The ambulance waited downstairs. Catherine needed urgent medical attention, Henry needed protection, and Alexander Hayes, the man who planned every second of his existence with military precision, found himself facing the most impulsive and important decision of his life. "Yes, I'm staying with you," he said, surprising himself with the firmness in his voice. "I'm not going to leave you alone, champ, I promise." At the hospital, Alexander found himself in completely unfamiliar territory. The emergency room at New York Presbyterian Hospital buzzed with frantic activity. Stretchers rushed by. Families cried in corners. Doctors shouted urgent orders. Henry remained glued to him like his only anchor amid the chaos, his little hands clutching tightly to the jacket of the suit Alexander was wearing. The boy hadn't loosened his grip for a single second since they got into the ambulance. "Doctor, what's the situation?" Alexander asked when a doctor finally approached the waiting room. "Doctor." Ramirez was a man in his mid-40s with deep bags under his eyes, speaking of endless shifts, but his eyes reflected genuine warmth. "Mr. Hayes, the patient Catherine Reed is stable for now, but her condition is extremely concerning." The doctor consulted the chart on his tablet. "She presents severe malnutrition, critical anemia, extreme dehydration, and evident signs of advanced pulmonary tuberculosis. From what we've determined, she's been hiding these symptoms for months, possibly years." Alexander felt the floor shift under his feet. Henry squeezed his hand tighter, not fully understanding the medical words, but perfectly grasping the gravity of the tone. "Is my mummy going to get better?" The child's voice trembled so much it was barely audible over the hospital noise. "Doctor." Ramirez crouched down to be at Henry's level, showing a compassion that deeply moved Alexander. "Your mummy is very strong, champ. We're going to do everything possible to heal her, but she needs to stay here for several days while we give her special medicines." After Henry nodded with tears streaming down his cheeks, the doctor stood up and looked at Alexander seriously. "I need to speak with you privately, Mr. Hayes." In the doctor's office, away from childish ears, "Doctor," Ramirez revealed an even more devastating reality. "Sir, during the exam we discovered something else. Catherine has been selling blood regularly to get extra money. The repeated puncture marks on her arms are evident. Her body is completely exhausted. Frankly, it's a miracle she's survived this long in these conditions. Why would she do something like that?" Alexander felt dizzy, unable to process how someone could reach such an extreme of desperation. From what she told us in moments of lucidity before we sedated her, it was all to ensure her son had food, school supplies, and a roof over his head. She deprived herself of everything, absolutely everything, to give Henry what he needed. The doctor paused significantly. "According to our records, Catherine has no health insurance and no family listed as emergency contacts. Only her workplace appears." Guilt began to devour Alexander from within. How many times had he passed by Catherine in his apartment, without really seeing her, without asking how she was, without noticing the obvious signs of illness that now seemed so evident? The persistent cough he had ignored, thinking it was a simple cold, the extreme paleness he attributed to normal fatigue, the way she moved slower lately, as if every step cost her superhuman effort. "How much will the full treatment cost?" Alexander asked, his voice loaded with determination. "Treatment for tuberculosis is long and complex. Between medications, hospitalizations, specialized tests, and nutritional therapy, we're talking about approximately $15,000 over the next 6 months, and that's being conservative." For Alexander, $15,000 was less than what he spent on a weekend in the Hamptons with his business club friends. For Catherine, it represented more than 2 years of her full salary. The brutal disparity between their worlds hit him like a hammer to the conscience. Authorize everything. I want her to receive the best treatment available, doctors, specialists, private room, everything she needs. The words came out of Alexander before he could question himself. When he returned to the waiting room, he found Henry curled up in a plastic chair, hugging a worn backpack that he recognized as the one the boy had insisted on bringing from the apartment. The little one looked so vulnerable, so lost in that huge hospital, that Alexander felt a wave of protection he had never experienced before. "Henry, are you hungry?" he asked, realizing the child probably hadn't eaten anything all day. "A little, sir, but I don't want to bother. Mum says I shouldn't ask things from rich people because that's being a mooch." Henry looked down, ashamed, and Alexander felt his heart break in two. The hospital cafeteria was almost empty at that hour of the night. Alexander watched, fascinated, as Henry devoured a ham sandwich with a voracity that revealed accumulated hunger from days, possibly weeks. The boy ate carefully not to waste a single crumb, gathering with his finger those that fell on the napkin and putting them in his mouth. "When was the last time you ate something, champ?" Alexander asked softly. "Yesterday morning, sir. Mum left my breakfast ready on the table before she went to work. She always leaves it ready before leaving." Henry took a sip of orange juice. "But when I woke up yesterday and saw that Mum was really sick, I didn't want to eat because I thought maybe she'd be hungry when she woke up." The childish logic, so pure and heartbreaking, made Alexander have to look away to hide the tears threatening to spill. A 5-year-old boy had gone more than 24 hours without eating to save food for his sick mother. Meanwhile, Alexander had probably wasted more food in a single business dinner than Henry saw in a week. "Henry, I need to ask you something important. Do you have any family, grandparents, uncles, cousins, who can take care of you while your mum recovers?" Alexander needed to know, though something inside him already anticipated the answer. "My grandma died when I was 3. Mum says she's in heaven watching over me from above." Henry played with his juice straw, "and my daddy left when I was really little. Sometimes he comes to ask my mum for money, and she cries after he leaves." "Does your dad visit you often?" "Not much. The last time was like 2 months ago. He came smelling weird, like the guy who sells beer on the corner. He yelled mean things at my mum, and she put me in the bathroom so I wouldn't hear. But I did hear." Henry's eyes filled with tears. "He said we were a burden and that he wished he'd never met us." The fury Alexander felt was so intense he had to clench his fists under the table to control himself. What kind of man could abandon such an incredible child and then have the nerve to show up occasionally to torment the family he left behind? Back in the waiting room, a nurse approached with news. "Mr. Hayes, the patient is waking up. She's asking for her son. Can you come see her briefly?" The reunion between mother and son was something Alexander would never forget. Catherine, despite her extreme weakness and the multiple IV lines connected to her arms, lit up completely when Henry ran into the room. The hug between them was so charged with pure love and contained desperation that Alexander had to turn to the window to hide his emotion. "My son, my love, are you okay? Did you get really scared?" Catherine stroked her son's hair with trembling hands. "Mum, Mr. Alexander took care of me, gave me food, and stayed with me the whole time." Henry spoke rapidly. "I wasn't scared because he was with me." Catherine looked up at Alexander, and in her eyes was a mix of deep gratitude and painful shame. "Mr. Hayes, I don't know how to thank you for everything you've done. It was never my intention to miss work or cause you problems. I tried to get up, but my body wouldn't respond anymore. Catherine, please don't worry about that now." Alexander approached the bed. "The only important thing is that you recover. Your job is secure, with a raise and full health insurance for you and Henry." Tears began to roll down Catherine's face. "Sir, I can't accept charity. I've always worked honestly for what I have. It's not charity, it's justice, and it's the least I can do after being so blind." Alexander paused, surprised by his own vulnerability. "Catherine, for these years you worked in my home without me really seeing you as a person. That's going to change." After Catherine fell asleep again from the sedatives, Alexander took Henry back to his apartment. During the drive in the Tesla, the boy stayed quiet, looking out the window at the city lights. Alexander watched him in the rearview mirror, noting how the little one tried to stay awake despite the evident exhaustion. "Henry, have you ever been to the Upper East Side?" Alexander asked, trying to distract the boy from his worries. "I don't know where that is, sir. I hardly ever leave my neighborhood. Mom says the subway costs a lot of money, and it's better to walk when we need to go somewhere." Arriving at the luxury building where Alexander lived was like transporting Henry to another planet. The boy froze in the marble lobby, his small eyes scanning the imposing columns, the crystal chandeliers hanging from the high ceiling, and the uniformed doorman who greeted them with exaggerated reverence. "Good evening, Mr. Hayes. Is the young man a relative of yours?" the doorman asked, with poorly disguised curiosity. "He's my special guest and will be staying with me until further notice." The firmness in Alexander's voice made it clear he wouldn't accept questions. The elevator rose silently to the 15th floor. Henry pressed his nose against the elevator mirror, amazed by his own reflection multiplied infinitely. When the doors opened directly into Alexander's penthouse, the boy stepped back, intimidated. The 3,500 square foot apartment was a temple of modern minimalism. Light wood floors, pristine white walls, Italian designer furniture, and contemporary art pieces carefully lit. Everything screamed money, power, and a loneliness Alexander had never wanted to acknowledge until that moment. "You live here all by yourself, sir?" Henry asked in awe, his bare feet leaving small prints on the white carpet. "Yes, I live alone," Alexander replied, and for the first time, the words sounded sad instead of satisfying. "It must be really lonely. Our house is tiny, but Mum and I talk a lot. Who do you talk to here?" The innocent question pierced Alexander's defenses like an arrow. For years, he had filled his life with business meetings, dinners with investors, and superficial outings with women who only saw his bank account. But real conversations, genuine human connections that had disappeared from his existence long ago. That night, as he prepared the guest room for Henry, Alexander realized his designer home had not a single object that might interest a child. No toys, no children's books, no bright colors. Everything was elegant, expensive, and completely sterile. Yet, despite its simplicity and poverty, their apartment had been full of love, drawings on the walls, and the warmth only a real home can have. He added a creative touch by ordering a set of glow-in-the-dark stars for the ceiling, something to make the room feel more magical for the boy. "Mr. Alexander," Henry called from the doorway of the assigned room, "can I sleep on the couch in the living room instead of this big bed? It scares me a little." Alexander looked at the king-size bed, which indeed seemed to swallow the small child. "How about I bring some extra pillows to make you feel more protected?" As he arranged the pillows around Henry, creating a cozy nest, Alexander surprised himself by humming a lullaby he hadn't heard in years. The boy watched him with those huge eyes that seemed to see straight into the soul. "Sir, do you have kids?" Henry asked with genuine curiosity. The question hit Alexander in a vulnerable spot he preferred to keep closed. "No, I don't have kids. Did you ever want to?" "Once I thought I did, but things didn't turn out as expected." Alexander sat on the edge of the bed, surprised to be sharing something so personal. "Sometimes life takes you down different paths than you planned. My mom says sometimes God's plans are better than ours, even if we don't understand them at first." Henry yawned, fighting sleep. "Do you think God brought you to me and my mum for a reason?" Alexander had no answer for that question. He hadn't thought about God or divine plans in many years. His world was ruled by business strategies, market analyses, and calculated decisions. But looking at that child who had chosen him as protector in the most terrifying moment of his short life, Alexander began to wonder if perhaps there were greater forces at work in the universe than his arrogance had allowed him to consider. If you like this story and want to keep seeing content that touches your heart, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Every story we share here has the power to remind us what really matters in life: love, compassion, and our shared humanity. And now I want to ask you something. Have you ever had a moment in your life where someone appeared just when you needed them most? Tell me in the comments about your experience. I love reading your stories and knowing these words resonate with you. The first week with Henry transformed Alexander's penthouse irreversibly. The apartment, which had been a museum of minimalist design, now had crayon drawings taped to the fridge, toys scattered in the living room, and the sound of childish laughter bouncing off walls that had previously known only silence. Alexander had hired a professional nanny recommended by a top agency, but he quickly discovered he preferred spending time with Henry personally, rescheduling his business meetings to be present for meals and evenings. To add a personal flair, he started a new tradition of weekend trips to Central Park, where they flew kites and shared ice cream, building memories that filled the once empty space. However, the fragile tranquility they had built together exploded one afternoon when the doorman called the intercom with urgency in his voice. "Mr. Hayes, there's a man in the lobby insisting on coming up. He says he's the father of the child staying with you and he's here to take him." Alexander felt his blood freeze in his veins. Henry, who was playing with building blocks in the living room, lifted his head immediately upon hearing the words. The absolute terror that appeared in the boy's eyes confirmed all the suspicions Alexander had about the absent father. "Don't let him come up. I'll be down in 5 minutes." Alexander hung up and knelt in front of Henry. "Champ, stay here with Maria. I'm going to talk to your dad." "No, please, Mr. Alexander, don't let him take me. He's mean when he drinks beer. Once he hit my mom, and I hid in the closet until he left." Henry clung to Alexander's neck desperately, his little body shaking violently. The fury Alexander felt was so intense he had to breathe deeply several times to control himself. He promised Henry he wouldn't let anything bad happen and went down to the lobby with iron determination. What he found there confirmed all his worst expectations. Richard Mendoza was about 38, but looked a decade older due to evident alcoholism. His bloodshot eyes, wrinkled clothes smelling of stale tobacco and beer, and aggressive posture revealed a man who had let his demons consume him completely. He was arguing with the doorman, his voice slurring the words barely perceptibly. "So you're the rich guy playing daddy to my kid," Richard spat when he saw Alexander approach. "I came to get Henry. He's my son, and he has to come with me right now." "Henry stays with me until Catherine recovers," Alexander replied with a calm he didn't feel. "The boy is well cared for. He has food, shelter, and safety, everything you never gave him." Richard laughed bitterly, and Alexander could see several missing teeth in his mouth. "Look at the arrogant mister. You think your money gives you the right to steal my family? I'm the biological father, and the law is on my side, asshole. The law protects children from negligent and abusive parents, and from what I see, you fit that category perfectly." Alexander stepped forward, his imposing height intimidating Richard despite the latter's drunken state. "Watch what you say, Junior." Richard advanced, staggering slightly. "I can call the police right now and report you for kidnapping. How do you think that'll look in the newspapers? Millionaire entrepreneur accused of illegally holding his employee's son. Your reputation would be worth shit." Alexander recognized the veiled threat for what it was, barely disguised extortion. Richard didn't want Henry back. He wanted to turn him into an easy source of income. The nausea he felt was physical and overwhelming. "How much?" Alexander asked with disgust. "How much money do you want to leave Henry alone?" The smile that appeared on Richard's face was repulsive. "Now we're speaking the same language, buddy. Look, I'm reasonable $500 a month, and I forget I have a son. It's a bargain, considering all you spend on your fancy suits and imported car." Before Alexander could respond, an authoritative voice interrupted the confrontation. "Mr. Mendoza, I need to speak with you." A woman in her 50s with a CPS badge hanging from her neck approached with a stern expression. "I'm social worker Gabriela Torres, and I've received multiple reports about your behavior toward your son and ex-partner." Richard's face paled visibly. "I don't know what you're talking about, ma'am. I just came to see my kid. We have documentation of 3 domestic violence complaints that Miss Catherine Reed filed against you before you abandoned the home. There are also hospital records of injuries consistent with physical abuse." Gabriela consulted her folder with professional efficiency. "Mr. Hayes, could we speak privately about the minor's current situation?" In the building's administrative office, Gabriela revealed she had been investigating the case since the hospital reported Catherine's situation. "Mr. Hayes, I understand your intentions are noble, but the legal situation is complex. The biological father has rights, though his history is concerning. That man doesn't deserve to be called a father," Alexander responded with contained vehemence. "He abandoned Catherine and Henry when the boy was 2. He shows up occasionally only to extort money. Henry is terrified of him." "I know, and that will be considered, but we need to follow the proper legal protocols." Gabriela paused significantly. "Have you considered applying for formal custody of the child with the mother's consent and evidence of paternal abandonment?" It could be possible. The idea had been germinating in Alexander's mind for days, but hearing it voiced aloud gave it a tangible reality that both terrified and excited him. Do you think it would be possible? Legally, I mean with a good lawyer and the proper documentation, yes, especially if the mother agrees and the father has a provable history of neglect. Gabriella closed her folder. But you must understand this isn't just a legal decision, it's a lifelong commitment. Adopting or becoming the legal guardian of a child changes everything. That night, after Richard left with empty threats about returning with lawyers, Alexander sat with Henry on the penthouse balcony. New York City stretched before them like a sea of twinkling lights. The boy was curled up against him, wrapped in a soft blanket Alexander had bought specifically for him. "Mr. Alexander," Henry said in a small voice, "are you going to send me back with my dad?" "Never, champ, I promise." Alexander tightened the hug protectively. "I'm going to do everything in my power to make sure you're safe." "Does that mean I can stay with you forever, like your real son?" The question shattered and rebuilt something fundamental in Alexander's heart. For 32 years, he had built his identity around professional success, accumulating wealth and power as if it could fill the void he never wanted to acknowledge. But in less than 2 weeks, a 5-year-old boy had shown him what it really means to be rich. Having someone who loves you unconditionally, someone worth sacrificing anything for. "If your mum agrees, and if you want, I'd love for you to be my son." The words came out loaded with an emotion Alexander didn't know he was capable of feeling. "I do want that," Henry responded immediately, lifting his little face to look at him with those huge eyes full of hope. "You're the best dad I could have. You take care of me, feed me, don't yell or smell bad like my other dad." The innocent but devastating comparison between him and Richard made Alexander understand the magnitude of the responsibility he was assuming. Being a father wasn't about providing material things, though that helped. It was about being present, offering emotional security, being the safe haven where a child could grow without fear. The next day, Alexander visited Catherine in the hospital with a proposal that had been maturing in his heart. He found her sitting up in bed, visibly stronger after days of intensive treatment, but with maternal worry etched deeply on her face. "Catherine, I need to talk to you about something very important," Alexander began, choosing his words carefully. "These days with Henry have changed me in ways I never imagined possible. That boy awakened something in me that I thought I'd lost forever. The desire to be a father, to protect, to love unconditionally." Catherine watched him attentively, tears already forming in her eyes before he finished speaking. "I want to adopt Henry officially, with your permission, of course. I want to give him all the opportunities he deserves, education, health, security. But more than that, I want to be his father, not just on paper, but for real. I want to be present for every important moment in his life, from his first day of school to his college graduation." Alexander paused, his voice cracking slightly. "Catherine, I love your son as if he were my own, and if you give me that chance, I swear I'll dedicate the rest of my life to making sure he's happy." Tears streamed freely down Catherine's face. "Mr. Alexander, you don't know how many nights I prayed for someone good to appear in my son's life. I knew my time was running out because of the illness. Every day I woke up unable to breathe well. I was terrified, thinking, what would happen to Henry if I wasn't around anymore?" "You're going to be fine," Alexander interrupted. "The doctors say with the right treatment, you'll recover completely, but even if I recover, I could never give Henry everything he needs. I have no education, no savings, nothing except my love as a mother." Catherine took Alexander's hand in hers, her slender fingers trembling. "If you truly want my son, if you promise to care for and love him, then yes, I accept. Henry deserves to have a father who sees him as the treasure he is." The gratitude Alexander felt was so overwhelming, he had to close his eyes for a moment to contain the emotion. "Thank you, Catherine. I promise you'll never regret this decision. Just one more thing," Catherine added with surprising firmness. "I want to remain part of his life, not as an employee, but as his mum, because no matter how much you adopt him legally, I'll always be the woman who brought him into this world." "Of course," Alexander responded immediately. "Henry needs his mum in his life. We'll be a family, the three of us together. I'll help you find a better job with hours that let you spend time with him, and when you're fully recovered, You can move to an apartment near mine so Henry can visit you whenever he wants. The legal adoption process turned out to be complex, but not impossible with Alexander's resources. He hired the best family law firm in New York. The battle against Richard was dirty. He showed up occasionally with threats and demands, but his history of domestic violence, proven abandonment, and alcohol addiction worked against him. After 3 months of hearings, testimonies, and psychological evaluations, the judge finally ruled in Alexander's favor. The day the adoption became official, Alexander organized a small celebration in his penthouse. Catherine, now recovered and working in an administrative position at one of Alexander's companies, was there with tears of joy. Henry, now in new clothes but still with that beautiful humility that characterized him, held the official document that legally made him Henry Hayes Reed. "Dad," Henry said, testing the word he could now use without reservation, "this means I don't have to worry about my other dad coming to get me anymore, right? Never again, champ. Now you're officially my son, and no one can change that." Alexander lifted him in his arms, marveling at how that small boy had achieved the impossible, softening a heart that had spent decades protecting itself behind walls of ambition and coldness. The following months brought profound changes to Alexander's life. His penthouse transformed into a true home, with family photos on the walls, carefully selected educational toys, and the constant sound of Henry's laughter, filling spaces that had once known only corporate silence. Alexander completely reorganized his priorities, delegating more responsibilities in his company to attend Henry's school events, help with homework, and simply be present. One afternoon, while helping Henry with a science project on the solar system, Alexander reflected on the extraordinary path that had led him to that moment. It had started with an angry phone call to fire an employee he considered irresponsible. That same call had led him to discover a world of pain and sacrifice existing right under his nose, invisible to someone so consumed by his own importance. "Dad," Henry said, while carefully gluing a picture of Saturn onto his poster board, "my teacher asked today what we wanted to be when we grow up. All my friends said things like doctor or baseball player. And what did you say, champ?" "I said I wanted to be like you, someone who helps people who need it." Henry looked up with those deep eyes that always seemed to see beyond appearances. "Because you saved my mom and me when we needed it most. And the teacher said that's the most important thing anyone can do." Alexander felt a lump in his throat. In his relentless pursuit of business success, he had forgotten that true legacy isn't measured in bank figures or luxury properties, but in the lives you touch and the human connections you build. Henry, with his innocence and childish wisdom, had taught him more about the true meaning of success in a few months than decades of corporate triumphs ever could. That night, after tucking Henry in with the established ritual of a bedtime story, forehead kiss, and whispered promise that he'd always be there, Alexander stood at the door, watching his son sleep peacefully. The boy who had answered the phone with terror in his voice now slept securely, surrounded by unconditional love and the certainty that he'd never be alone again. Catherine had been right during their hospital conversation. The plans of God or the universe, or whatever that mysterious force guiding our lives is called, sometimes are better than our own. Alexander had planned a life of solitary success, accumulating wealth as if it could fill the void inside him. But a misdialed phone call, answered by a terrified child, had changed his entire destiny. Now he understood that true wealth isn't measured in bank accounts or luxury properties. True wealth is having someone who calls you dad with genuine love, someone whose happiness becomes your absolute priority, someone who teaches you that unconditional love is worth more than all the business empires in the world. While gently closing the door to Henry's room, Alexander whispered a promise to the universe. "Thank you for giving me a second chance to be the man I always should have been. I promise not to waste it." And in that promise, sealed in the silent darkness of a penthouse that had finally become a home, Alexander Hayes found the peace he had sought throughout his adult life. Not in professional success, not in wealth accumulation, but in the simple and profound privilege of being the father to an extraordinary child who had taught him that sometimes the greatest blessings come disguised as crises you never asked to face. If this story touched your heart as much as it did mine in telling it, I invite you to subscribe to our channel. Here we share stories that remind us of our shared humanity, that inspire us to be better people, and that celebrate the transformative power of unconditional love. And now I want to know from which city in America or which part of the world you're watching us. Let me know in the comments. I love knowing these stories travel across borders and touch hearts in different corners of the planet. We're a big family united by these stories that remind us what really matters in life. See you in the next story. Until soon, family.